You're watching BBC News. These are the headlines. The UN's head of humanitarian affairs has made an emotional plea for civilians in Ukraine to be spared, describing how millions of ordinary lives have been shattered. Ukraine blames Russia for continuing to bombard major towns. Moscow's offer of humanitarian corridors into its territory had earlier been rejected. A Ukrainian delegation has met Russian counterparts on the border with Belarus for a third round of talks. Moscow says it will accept nothing short of Ukraine's surrender. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is visiting Eastern European nations in search of a way to end the crisis. Refugees continue to escape the fighting into neighbouring countries where they can. Since the invasion began, more than 1.7 million people, most of them women and children, have fled the country. Those are the headlines.
Efforts to evacuate people from the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol failed after reports of shelling along the escape corridor. Good morning from Doha, everyone. I'm Kamal Santamaria, continuing coverage on Al Jazeera of the Russia-Ukraine war. Poland has offered to donate its Soviet-era MiG-29 fighter jets to the United States for transfer to Ukraine, but Washington says that proposal is untenable. Also, the United Nations now says 2 million people have fled the fighting, most of them women, children and the elderly. And the US moves to ban the import of Russian oil as Western nations try to reduce their reliance on Moscow's energy sources.
This is DW News, and these are our top stories. Ukraine says it's been evacuating people from several areas via humanitarian corridors agreed with Russia. Buses have been taking people from the northeastern city of Sumy. Among the evacuees are students from India, China and African countries. Local authorities said 21 civilians were killed in an airstrike there overnight. And Poland says it will give all of its MiG-29 fighter jets to the United States under a scheme that would allow the Soviet-era aircraft to be used by the Ukrainian military. The US State Department official Victoria Nuland called it a surprise move by Warsaw. Ukraine wants the planes for its fight against the Russian invasion. President Joe Biden says the U.S. will ban imports of Russian oil, which makes up about 8% of its incoming fuel. Meanwhile, the European Commission says imports of Russian natural gas could be cut by 2/3 before next winter. Moscow has suggested it may shut off gas flowing through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline to Germany. This is DW News from Berlin. You can find much more on.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Good Morning India. I'm Gargi Rawat. Stay with us for all the news you need to start your day with. The latest on Ukraine as the Russian invasion enters the 14th day today. Also a day ahead of counting. Parties have gone into a huddle. Let's take a look at the headlines we're tracking. Civilians fleeing Russian invasion in Ukraine are left embattled cities along safe corridors. The United Nations says over 2 million people have fled as the Russian invasion has entered the 14th day. The U.S. bans Russian oil imports over Ukraine invasion. It's Biden administration's most far-reaching action yet against Moscow since the war began. New satellite images show Russian shelling damage to a bridge in the Kyiv suburb and the extent of fighting near the Ukrainian capital. The lowest ever closing of the rupee at 77 against the dollar. India's oil and currency concerns mount. Oil minister says decision on fuel prices to be based on public interest. Ahead of counting of votes, the Samajwadi Party leader Akhilesh Yadav's sensational claim says EVMs are being moved. Varanasi DM says those EVMs were used for training, not voting. And ahead of the results, power games are on in the tiny state of Goa, where once again exit polls predict a hung assembly like last time, the BJP and Congress negotiators in action.